Welcome back to the Unstuck movement, true testimonies of breakthrough. I am your host, Rob Z. This platform was created to help you break the chains in your life that have been holding you back. Today, we have the wonderful Kylee Leota with us on the podcast. And Kylee, I want to kick things off with a powerful question. Right as we get into the jump off point, how do we go deep right away? You've written an incredible book called Infinite Leadership. It's coming out, I believe you said, next month.
Yes.
And in this, each letter of infinite is a pillar for success in leadership. Which one of those pillars to you is the most powerful and the one we should focus on before the rest?
Yeah. Thanks, Rob, so much for having me. So the infinite pillars, so the letters of infinite, stand for identity, nurturing, fearlessness, innovation, nobility, influence, transformation, and ecosystem. So that's a whole lot of stuff to get through, right? And when you're a macro person, you might like the big picture, might like the whole picture. And for other people that like it to do it at micro and one step at a time, you might need to focus on one pillar. And one of the things I always talk about is you can the beauty of infinite leadership is you can kind of pick whichever one you want to focus on at any given time. It's not necessarily linear, because the idea of infinite is an ongoing evolution for infinite opportunities and infinite possibilities. But I always encourage people to start with the very first I, because the first I is identity. And Vusi Thembekwayo is an African entrepreneur, and he said, identity is man-made, so thereby it can be man-changed. So if you've got something that you've got this identity that maybe you've been attached to that maybe is no longer serving you, we can often feel powerless to change our circumstance. But with this at the forefront of our mind, we can sit there and go, well, this identity was maybe bestowed upon me by somebody else. Remember, you're the class clown, or you're the lazy person, or you're this. That we may have absorbed somebody else's narrative about us to form our identity. Or we might have been through experiences like domestic violence, or, been on the receiving end of some sort of trauma. And we can feel like, victim is an identity that we have got, and we just doesn't sit with us anymore. And so when we're working through that, and this is true in leadership as well, what got you here won't necessarily got you there. So the version of you that has been successful to this point, there's always going to be things that aren't going to serve you to get to the next level. So being able to constantly evolve, reflect, recalibrate in terms of who am I now? Who do I aspire to be? What are the attributes of that person that will get me those outcomes? And what do I need to look at moving forward?
No doubt. The whole concept around identity, breaking it down to like the core of who we are and how did we start out in our life, because we really don't have any control when we're young over what does form and shape our identity, but we do have control over that as we get older and we become aware of those things. So I want to dive into this, right? So I want to find out what your identity was and how you've transformed that over time and how you've transformed that for other leaders over time. Before we get there, I just want to welcome everybody to the platform. This platform was created to have real examples of real people who have gone through incredible breakthroughs in their lives. So you can have an example that it's possible for you also. We're sponsored by the Connected Leaders Academy. Check out connectedleadersacademy.com. Also, I just want to let everybody know that if you feel that you are the expert in your space and your industry, but you want to be that go-to authority for people to come to, what I would love to help you do is create a platform that leaves a lasting impact in people's lives, that shows your true worth and also makes incredible connections for you. If it sounds exciting to you, join the waitlist for the Pro Podcaster Academy right now at robzwentz.com. Kylee is the founder and chief vision officer of Elements for Success. She empowers individuals and organizations through transformational experiences and safe, courageous conversations. As an educator and coach, she provides practical tools to unlock potential and inspire sustainable growth. I love what you do. I love talking leadership. I love talking identity also. So what was your identity? And I assume that was kind of a make your mess your message story that brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, so I think one key thing was I would never have considered my identity as someone who was a leader. And we were talking about a mutual admiration earlier about John C. Maxwell, and he talks about the fact that you're a leader no matter where you're at. And I think that my childhood, so I always talk about in identity that we had things that we did when we were young to be loved, valued, seen, heard, and accepted. That's, and for some of that, it's around people pleasing, which was, big hand up here, helping others, regardless of sometimes whether they wanted it or not. But I grew up with that narrative of service. And I think that's a beautiful thing to have. But when you have a motivation to serve, it's a bit more altruistic than validating your self-worth, which serves as a service, and helping as a fear versus a motivation. And so, which seems like a really sort of inconsequential difference. But the truth is, one is negative in terms of, if I'm serving you or helping you because I'm trying to validate my self-worth, I am not going to get the outcomes that I would like as if I'm serving you altruistically, because at the end of the day, I just want to be of service to other people, right? Mm-hmm. We've all got those different stories. So one of the things that I talk about, and a big piece of my story, was giving myself permission to accept that that's what I needed when I was younger, to feel loved, valued, seen, heard, and accepted, which then has created behaviors that were both helpful and maybe unhelpful along the journey. And as my journey into leadership, both personally and professionally, because we also talked a little bit off air about alignment. And I think too often the problem is we have a personal version of ourselves and a professional version. But if we can get some bit more synchronicity about the fact that I'm pretty much who I am at work and at home, or in my role as a leader as to out. And I'm a parent, I'm a single parent, and I actually am a leader in my household. And so that was another narrative, that, because if I go back to my I thing of, oh, well, I'm not a leader. Well, then who's leading the ship? It's chaos otherwise, right? So my identity has evolved, and so Vusi Thembako's quote really, really helped me move from feeling stuck into feeling like I have choice and control over my own life, and what would that need to look like. And another really great quote he said is, excuses are valid. So what happened to you is valid. So I left quite a significant domestic violence relationship. I have also had a few other things happen in my life. I've also had injuries and different things. So those things are valid. They happen to me. And when we sit there and go, oh, it doesn't matter, or we should rise, I think it invalidates the fact that these things actually are true. But the next part of that is, but they don't get you where you want to go, right? So I can sit on that excuse and go, well, yep, that happened and that's valid, but it's not going to get me where I'm going to go. So how do I move through that? And my experience with leaving a really unhealthy and unsafe relationship was the fact that I was this leader already. I was in an organization. I was high up in the organization. I was one of the top leaders in the organization. And I'm sitting there going, how did this happen to me? I know stuff. Like, it's not like I'm not educated. It's not, So first of all, it can happen to anybody. Like, domestic and family violence doesn't discriminate through levels of college qualifications or anything like that. But the second part of it was, I wasn't applying some of those lessons that I was very good at applying in my work life, in my personal life. So the first step was to take back control and take on board the fact that I was the leader in my own life, and recognize that I had choice and control over things. And we always have choices, even if they're hard, and even if they're difficult, and even if they're uncomfortable. But to take that. And I think sometimes it's about having that vision of where you want to go. So for me personally, it was like, well, what kind of family life do I want to create? That's the big picture. And then taking it back to, okay, what are the micro steps to get me along the way? Same with professional leadership. If I wasn't getting outcomes that I thought needed to happen, what's the big picture or the vision that I was working towards? And then what were the micro steps? And that really identified with my identity, because if I was too unsure, because I was worried about people liking me, like I mentioned, people pleaser before, then that was actually holding me back from speaking up in meetings or challenging things that I didn't think were okay, all of those things. So what did I need to do? Because I fundamentally believed in this thing over here, but I didn't want to upset anybody to get that thing. So where was this paradigm shift in my identity, and what did I need to work on to allow me to get to that place where I was okay with challenging the status quo in a healthy and respectful way, of course?
Yeah, I love that so much because I've very much experienced that in my own journey. I talk about it a lot of like being bold in your communication, not being like a bull in a china shop that just runs people over, being tactful and kind in your communication, but being bold, saying the stuff that you
Mm,
know needs to be said and approaching people in that way. Because that's what we need, and it's what other people need, and it's what we need for our own personal integrity also. And usually those things that you're being bold saying are the elephants in the room that people aren't addressing. So somebody
yeah,
needs to say it. Why not it be you? uh,
for sure.
you said something there that I think is huge. This was a huge struggle for me, how to synchronize personal and professional me. And I felt this way for such a long time. Like, there's two versions of me. There's the the personal version of me that's fun, lighthearted, kind of goofy. But I feel like when I'm professional, I have to be like this professional person that is
Mhm,
not allowed to be the real me. And I
mhm.
noticed this disconnect that was holding me back in my professional career because of that. Uh, what is what was the difference between personal and professional you, and how did you bring them together?
I think I was probably a lot more considered in my work environment. So I think we all wear masks. I think that's true of most of us. I think the we were actually so I my background started off in education, and we were explicitly taught that you had to leave your personal life at the gate. You actually were not allowed to bring it in.
Mm.
So this whole idea of showing emotion at work, being viscerally upset about anything. So, and I worked in violent schools. I worked in really high challenging behavior schools where stuff happened that was hurtful, and all of these things. And you're like trying to, this arm, like nothing bothers me. Well, I think we did the children that we served at that point a disservice, because what we didn't model is it's actually okay to feel your feelings.
Yeah.
And then I would go home, and I would actually like have this overflow of emotion at home. So I wasn't even showing up the way I wanted to at home, because it had to come out somewhere, and everybody at home was copying that. Because and then I wasn't showing because I was tired, I was drained, I was fatigued. So I wasn't even being the fun mum that I wanted to be, because I had held it together so tightly in this environment. You know,
You have a pet
I
bird? Is there a bird in the house?
uh, it's actually outside. It's welcome to Australia, the native life, at 4:30 in the morning. But so I'll give you a really good example of this. Like I mentioned, I worked in a really volatile, violent school. I was once smashed in the head with a cricket bat by a student.
Wow.
I got into trouble for not attending the staff meeting that afternoon.
Wow.
We were also told you're not allowed to have sick days. You're also told all this sort of stuff. So what that wasn't safe for me to express that I was not okay, right?
Yeah.
That was considered. So for me, there was this massive disconnect at times. And so I've worked really, really hard. And I think the other part we talk about is permission and modeling. So if I want my staff to be okay, or I want my team to be okay with expressing what they really think, then how am I modeling that? And permission, so how am I giving them permission to do that? Modeling is one of the best ways that I can do that. If I'm saying one thing and not doing it, then it confuses my team. And I was
Mhm.
coaching this amazing female leader, and a really good example of that. She'd say to me, tell my staff all the time to make sure they have their breaks. Make sure you have your lunch, make sure you do this. And I said, when was the last time you had a lunch break at work? And she goes, oh, I don't do that. And I said, so what message are your staff receiving? What message are your team receiving, that you're telling them that you care about them and you want them to look after themselves? But when they see you not doing that, what do they think? And the answer was that they didn't think it was actually okay. They thought that she thought less of them for taking their break.
Yeah.
Now, that was not her intention at all, but it was the impact of her messaging between that misalignment.
Yeah. Yeah. And man, that's so common. That is like one of the most common things. Well, yeah, I tell other people to do it, but I can't do that. There's no way I could do. I mean, that's the disconnection of leadership to the employees and everybody that you work with, right? And
Yeah.
uh, I guess in her case, she was trying to help her employees. Usually, it's leadership is trying to protect themselves by putting their employees out there on blast so that they can stay
Yeah.
protected, right? But either way, that misalignment is really a major issue. You said about, you're mentioning about like these excuses, right? And how can we use our, because our excuses are valid, but how do we use our excuses to move forward? Like things happen to everybody. And I really think that, as especially in leadership, but I think anybody who's in like a leadership position in their job or whatever it might be, they feel like they can't show any cracks in the lining because people aren't going to respect them as a leader, right? But really, when you admit that things happen to you either before or you're going through them right now, it humanizes you and who you are, and that we're all on this thing. I have a coach right now who he said to me last week. He said, "Rob, don't be surprised by your brokenness, right?
Yeah.
Don't be surprised when anybody else is broken. We're human beings. We have parts of us that need to be healed, even if we're in a leadership position. Letting yourself admit that, and then also using that, that's a strength, right? That vulnerability is such a strength.
100%.
How do you help people in leadership realize that? How do you help them acknowledge that fact and then be able to express it?
Yeah, there's a saying that says, "What doesn't happen, it doesn't happen to you; it happens for you." And I've actually really struggled with that concept because my own personal experience of domestic violence is very hard to sit there and go, "How did that happen for me?" I can't conceptualize. I also had a friend of mine stabbed by her husband. She's still alive, and her whole family stabbed, and they're still alive. How could that happen for her? Like I can't conceptualize. So maybe at a maybe high level, I can understand why, you didn't get the promotion. Maybe that happened for you because something better is coming along. But in big ticket stuff, I really struggle to resonate with that thing. But Oprah Winfrey actually said, "But we can find wisdom in our wounds." And so in that brokenness, there's some learning there. Right? What did you learn about yourself? What did you learn about situations? What did you learn that you can then utilize to serve others so that maybe you can make their life a little bit easier, so that maybe they don't have to have that same experience. And so the wisdom in my wounds was my experience when I was then going back and dealing with people and families and things like that. I was in a very volatile community that had really high risk and high propensity of things like that. And when families, I got that rapport and trust faster because when I said, "I understand what you're going through," they could look in my eyes and go, "You do understand what I'm going through." I didn't need to compare. I didn't need to, this happened to me and this happened to you. But I could empathize at a new level that maybe other people couldn't. And that created a whole other stuff for me around what that looked like. And created better relationships and better connections for the families and the staff that I served.
Yeah, it's huge. It's everything to be able to do that and to authentically do it, right? There's so much power in that.
Yeah.
So we have to jump into a quick shout out to our sponsors for the podcast. When we come back, though, I want to talk about approaching conversations courageously, get more in depth with this, because as we mentioned before we started recording, I'm in America. The election 2024 just ended here. You said it even impacts people in Australia. There are visceral reactions all over the world. So being able to approach conversations about very sensitive subjects is always important, but I feel especially now is even more important. I just want to get into how you approach really difficult conversations and how you encourage others to do the same. We'll talk about that in 1 minute. Are you struggling to make consistent, valuable content for yourself? Do you want to have an efficient and effective way to create content that attracts the people that you want to connect with in life, the people you want to build relationships with in business? Do you want to be the go-to authority at what you do, at what you're great at? Would it be helpful for you if you had a platform that connects you to incredible people in your industry? The kind of platform that gets you leads and lands you clients without you having to beat down anybody's door or blow up anybody's inbox. Whether you're already creating content or you're desiring to start and it's something that's been kind of burning inside of you for a while, I urge you and encourage you to check out the Pro Podcaster Academy. Get started right now. Join the waitlist at robzwentz.com.
Hi, my name is Jose Escobar, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Connected Leaders Academy. We're a growing tribe, a community of entrepreneurs all over the world globally. If you're an entrepreneur, and you're looking to grow personally and professionally, scale your influence, develop your skill sets, move the needle in your business, more clients, more money, more profit, the bottom line, and of course, grow your circle and your network like never before, join the Connected Leaders Academy today. Check me out on Instagram and on Facebook, the @ JASCO25. We look forward to having you join us. Take care.
So, Kylee, loving this conversation. It's so good. Talking about these difficult conversations that need to happen. How do you approach a conversation when you know you need to do it, but you really don't want to?
Yeah, I think there's a few premises around that. So foundationally, I always talk about creating safe spaces for brave and courageous conversations. So the first part is, as a leader, have you facilitated that? And my second part of that is, how do you know? So I'm a leader. Of course, I create safe spaces for my staff. They can come to me anytime they want. Well, how do you know that your staff feel that that's actually okay versus you deciding for everybody that that's okay to do that? And I think psychological safety is talked about. I'm not sure how authentically it's done a lot of the time, but it's so we've got to have authentic psychological safety because that facilitates those safe spaces for brave and courageous conversations. So part of that is, am I the right person to have this conversation? And again, as leaders, I think sometimes we get in the hierarchical of, well, I'm the leader, so therefore, or I'm this person. But one of the things that I used to do in my team is go, okay, so if a conversation needs to be had, who's the best person to have that conversation? Because at the end of the day, it's the outcome that we want. My ego is not attached to me being hierarchically the leader of this team or the department to be the person that has to have the conversation. I can, but have we ever considered that maybe because of culture or because of circumstance or because of this, that maybe you're not the right person to have that conversation, even though from a leadership perspective, you have the right to have that conversation. So are you the right person? The second part of that is around, have you picked the right time? And the third part is, what's your role? How grounded can you stay? So we talked about politics, obviously, a little bit earlier, which most people have a very strong opinion on. So if you're trying to create safe spaces for brave and courageous conversations, how are you staying grounded as a leader in that, and how are you recognizing your own triggers so that you are then not hijacking the conversation and inadvertently making it unsafe for those people to have those conversations, right?
So say you do get really triggered in a conversation and you know you're not supposed to be getting triggered. What do you do?
Viktor Frankl says there's a space between stimulus and response. It's called the pause, right? I was delivering on this yesterday and I said, you know what? It's such a simplistic thing. Take a drink of water. Have a drink of water in all your meetings. And if you notice yourself starting to rise up, whether it be a water bottle where you take the time, because to the other person, it looks like you're taking a drink. For you, that's oh my gosh, get it together, take a sip of water, ground yourself in that conversation. Or if that doesn't do it, say, excuse me for a moment, I just need to go to the bathroom, or excuse myself. And I recognize this, or I recognize this conversation is really important. I've noticed that I'm feeling triggered right now. Can we circle back in 30 minutes? Can we just take a break on this particular conversation? And again, that's modeling, right? We're modeling how to handle conflict or how to handle challenging situations effectively and appropriately, because we all need to be able to navigate them, but we also need systems to manage ourselves through that. Because I always go, are you going to get the outcome that you want by getting dysregulated and not showing up as a version of yourself that you would like to into this conversation? So that relies a lot on self-awareness and being able to catch yourself in the moment. And that's a practice. Let's be honest. We're not all great. And, I'm sure you and I can preach all this stuff for the audience. We're also not perfect at it. Can tell you many examples where you haven't caught it early enough. And then afterwards you're like, yeah, okay.
Wow.
I see what we did there. But the more you practice, the better you get at it, right? So being able to have safe spaces for yourself to go, hey, I'd like to practice this hard conversation with a safe person, and start, what would it sound like? And if they started poking the bear for me around something that was hitting some pretty key points for me, First of all, do you even know what they are, or do they just unconsciously hijack you in the moment? Next minute, you are, triggered and feeling quite visceral in your response. Or actually, are you aware? And do you set some, foundation with your team around, hey, just so you know, for example, I'm pretty passionate about domestic violence, right? So I also have to be mindful, because of my experience, that I'm not triggered by that. And 90% of the time now, I'm actually pretty good at it. There's still the occasional thing that'll catch me off guard, and I'll be like, well, so I've recognized that. Hey guys, I've just recognized that. I'll be back in a second. I just need to reset myself and go out and have that conversation. And how often do we take, because we don't do that a lot of the time because we think it's weak. It's actually strength. It's like circling back. Hey, Rob, when we spoke the other day, I really didn't like how I showed up to the conversation. When you're ready, can we circle back? Because I'd like to have that opportunity to try that again.
It's really good advice. Really good advice. It's interesting. I feel like I'm very good at doing it in all aspects of my life, except for my very personal life with my kids, with my wife, right? That's the hardest part for me, because, and I'm, as you were saying that, I'm thinking like, what is it about my personal life that makes it difficult? And here's what it is. It's like, oh, I'm this professional, like, leadership communication coach. And so I should be able to do it so easily with the people that I'm closest with, when actually it's the hardest to do it with the people you're closest with, at least for me. So when it comes to like my son who's 10, I will, like you say, I'll fall short so often. It happens all the time. And I'm like, son of a gun, why am I doing this? I'm doing this again. Stop doing it. So putting that pause in and verbally saying, yeah, listen, I need to just step away for a minute. I need to just walk away from this for a second. I don't find myself getting triggered in my day-to-day life in my professional setting, but the personal setting, people closest to me, I definitely struggle with it the most. And that's the place where it needs the most work. So that's really good advice. And like you said, it's a source of strength. So looking at it, and I'm going to tell myself this, I'm sure it'll happen this week at some point. I'll have to be like, it's a strength. I need to verbalize. I need to walk away, take a drink of water. That's really good advice. Good stuff.
And you're also giving him permission to do the same. Yeah. Right. And if we can teach these kids at 10 and 11 to do this strategy, then by the time they're our age, 21, they'll be much better at it than we were at the same age. We're learning this on the back end versus the opportunity to teach it at the front end. And I'll give you a really good example in my personal life. So I have 3 children, currently 19, 18, and 11. So it's very similar. I know all about the 10-year-old. It's just such a delightful phase. But my now 18-year-old, he was the kid that would keep going. He was the kid that I'd be like, mate, like, we need a break. And he would follow me. I'd put myself in timeout, right? I wasn't putting him in timeout. I'd be like, I'm going to my room if you're doing this kind of stuff, right? And so we had to practice for years because he needed to have the last word. It was very important to him, et cetera, et cetera. He's also the oldest boy. I'm a single mom. He's big, all of that kind of stuff, right? So, as much as I can wrestle him to the ground, probably not the most effective leadership strategy in dealing with that kind of situation. But so he's just turned 18, but about 2 years ago, we've been practicing a lot. And we were having a robust conversation around something that both of us, we were both pretty stuck on something. And he turned around to me and he said, Mum, no good can come from continuing this conversation right now. I think we need to pause and come back when we're both a bit more regulated at 16, right? But that was a practice. We've been practicing it. Mate, I don't think any good can come from this conversation now. I think we'll have to circle back later. Mate, I think we need to pause. We can revisit this when we're both a bit calmer. Mate, let's do this kind of stuff. And at 16, he reverse engineered that on his mother, which is so delightful. But in that moment, I'm like, yeah, you're right. So the thing that we'd been practicing, he was able to implement. And that gives me a lot of hope for the future, that when he goes out into the workforce, if he gets stuck in a conversation, then he might actually have that tool in his toolbox to say, I can see we're stuck here. Let's circle back later. No good can come from us getting into this conflict over and over because it's not going anywhere right now. Yeah. Let's pause. Let's reflect. Let's step out and come back a little bit later.
Yeah.
So there is hope for 10-year-olds.
There is hope. Yeah.
Just so you know.
And I'll say this too, like, the next phase of that is, okay, so maybe I didn't catch myself, but I'm good at apologizing. That's one thing I know is like, I'll step out of line. I'll do something that I knew I shouldn't have done, but you always have to come back and apologize. This is kids' business, whatever it is, right? You have to acknowledge that humanness of like, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. And that's one of the things I think when we look at government and we look at people who are in charge of us, they don't ever apologize. There's never like, oh, I kind of screwed that up and I'm sorry. Like there's so much to that.
Apologize and attempt repair when ready, right? So one of the things that I say to my kids is, well, you've said thank you so much for saying you're sorry, but you've repeated the same behavior 5 times now. Yeah. So that apology kind of dilutes itself. So where's the repair? So what needs to happen now for us to rebuild trust or redo this or rebuild this, where you're saying that you'd like independence and I'm saying, well, kind of haven't demonstrated that to me. So what's the repair process here? Or if I've not shown up into the conversation, let's talk about this. What can I do differently next time? And that's another thing I say to my kids. So my son, he's very good at using my language back at me. It's so awesome. And we were talking about the phones, teenagers and the phones. And whilst my kids don't have social media, he'll play games on his phone or whatever. And I'll say to him, mate, you haven't done your jobs in taking your phone. And he said, well, what you tell me all the time is I need to learn to self-regulate, and I use the phone to self-regulate myself. So what would you like me to do if I don't have that? And I'm like, oh, that's so great. And I've said to him, well, if you've got a better solution outside of taking the phone, but unfortunately, this is the only thing that I know to be an effective tool to create a behavior change right now. But I'm open to considering another alternative if you've got one. So let me know if you've got one that you think would be better, and I'm more than happy to try it.
Wow,
but for right now, give me the damn phone.
Right. Yeah. Give me that freaking phone. It's so good. It's a constant balance. It's what I love about it's like a love-hate thing with life. It's what life is. It's like this constant balancing act. And the cross in the background, like some like Jesus in my faith, right? Of like praying to God and being like, God, I'm not going to do this thing again. And then, 10 minutes later, I'm doing it. Even in just,
I was going to say, and God chuckling, going, oh, of course you're not, Rob.
Right. Yeah, it makes you realize, especially in your thinking, it's like, wow, man, this is just like a nonstop thing. And it's so automatic. So like you went going back earlier to the pause, and we've talked about the pause a million times on this podcast, but like it's the simple things in life that are so important, the simple things that are so powerful. That pause is everything. And if you can really institute that pause in your thinking process before you act, it's everything, just to be able to let it settle in.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that in leadership we forget is we actually overcomplicate it a lot of the times.
Yeah.
It's not easy, but it's a bit more simplistic at times than we make it. We make it quite convoluted and make it very, very difficult. And we add these tiers and layers, but at its foundation, which I guess is what Infinite is about, is going back and going back foundationally, what's my identity right now and what do I need to do? The N is nurturing, that emotional intelligence piece, right? So what is it that's not working for me right now, or what am I not catching within myself? Do I have a loving critic in my life who can hold space for me to go, hey, there's something I'm not seeing here. What do you notice? And I was talking to someone yesterday and she was saying that, they said to me, when this happens, you do a face. And she goes, I don't have a face. And she goes, I turned to my friend, she goes, you've got the face, right? So we're not always aware. We're always going to have blind spots. But how do we get the feedback? And feedback in leadership is also difficult too, because some people, I have a very passionate perspective on 360-degree feedback, because if you don't have a psychologically safe organization, that is almost like just pull out the knives. It's an opportunity for people, because it's anonymous. It's like keyboard warriors, they asked my opinion. Instead of actually developing a really strong psychologically safe environment, getting some constructive feedback, because I have had very unconstructive feedback. I once got told in a 360-degree feedback that I talked too much to brown children in a school that was over 60% brown. So how is that constructive, right? So, but people feel like it's almost like permission to unleash, and they don't consider what that could look like. And so And the other part is when you in leadership, one of the things that I see people tearing themselves apart about is feeling like they get torn between competing bits of feedback. So Rob said, I need to do this. Mary said, I need to do that. They're competing bits of feedback. So how do I please both people? And we forget to recognize that we actually have a choice, and we can actually sit back and objectively observe the feedback and say, well, is there some validity to this feedback? Is that something I do? How would I know if that's something I do? And is it something that I feel I need to change right now? Or am I actually okay with that being the thing, right? And a beautiful piece, I was working in an office once, and a friend of mine, we sat in cubicles together, and she was told to go for a job, and then she didn't get the job, and somebody rang her up and asked her, would she like some feedback? And she went, no, thank you. And at the time, I'm like, why would you not want the feedback? Well, why would you know what to do better and improve and do all things? And she said to me, Kylee, you need to respect the person giving you the feedback. Yeah. And I'm like, whoa. I was like, oh, you have a choice in this, right? I have a choice whether I actually take that on board or not, or, and the thing about respecting the person giving, you don't have to like them, but respecting means that you believe that they're giving you feedback for your benefit versus their ego, right? Their goal is to help support you to be a better version of yourself rather than getting trapped in their ego of, well, I'm going to tell you what I think of you kind of idea.
Yeah, that's really true. Yeah, it's selective feedback, right? Deciding, and also you can choose when somebody's giving you feedback if it's unsolicited. You can choose whether you receive it or not. You have that choice within yourself to be like, I heard what they're saying, but I'm not going to receive that. So I think that's really important to be very aware of that also, because we can hear things from people and just take them as verbatim, take them as gospel. And that can really lead us into a lot of problems. So as we're coming to the end of this episode, I want to make sure people know how to get in contact with you. So your website is elements4success.com.au. And Infinite Leadership is coming out in December. If they want to get it, pre-order right now, elements4success.com/au or .au/books. The link, as you can see, is on the screen. So why should somebody, to wrap this up, why should somebody get the book? What value? I mean, clearly we talked about a lot of the value here, but anything we didn't include that they're going to get from that book?
Yeah, so the idea of infinite leadership is creating a model to drive continuous improvement and create excellence for everyone. And I think if we are, truly going to be the leaders that we're capable of becoming, it's not just about our own growth. It's about supporting that for everyone. And the beauty of infinite leadership is you always start with self. So self-leadership, because in order to lead others, you first got to lead yourself. And the idea is that if you go through the pillars for yourself, but you can also put a lens over that going, well, what's our identity as a team, our team? What are the self-awareness, the nurturing elements that we have to look for? Fearlessness, that courageous piece that we spoke about earlier. What are we not facing as a team that potentially we need to? And then how collectively are we going to do that? And so you can do it at an individual, family, team, organizational level. And that ecosystem is around that networking and supporting and creating harmony in our lives and in our teams to get that improvement moving forwards. So the idea of infinite leadership is for those people that are sitting there going, I wake up every morning wanting to be the best version of myself each and every single day. I have never come across a person who wakes up in the morning and then lays there and goes, how can I be the most terrible version of myself today? I think, that unconditional positive regard is that most people are doing the best they can with what they have. And so how do we support people to do better? And that's a leader's journey for not only for ourselves, but for those that we support. So the people that will buy the Infinite Leadership book are the ones that want to do better and want a reflective practice guide, because at each stage of your leadership journey, whether it's a new promotion, whether you're aspiring, whether it's personal leadership, professional leadership, there's always times you're going to get stuck. And then we can't say that we don't have access to the information. I think sometimes there's too much information to discern what's the right information for us. So the Infinite Leadership gives a framework to how to work through what information do I need right now, what do I need to focus on right now, rather than being overwhelmed by the whole picture of this, I have this running joke that we talk about adulting as a Google 5-star rating. And some of my clients are like, mate, I'm giving it a 0.5 star. Google 0.5 star rating today. That the last week for me has been pretty shocking. Or 4 stars for Google. You know, my life rating on Google this week is 4 stars. So, but even at 4 stars, how do we continue to drive that continuous improvement to make it 4.5 and 5? And so it gives us something to work towards. So I think that's the kind of person that's going to read this book and hopefully take away some really insightful, practical, that's the other part of it. For me, there's theory, and I'm a bit of a nerd, and at my office, my bookshelf is just like so high with books. But what people are struggling with is how to put it into practice. So this is a guide about how to take what you know, and then put it into practice to help drive that continuous improvement in your life, both personally and professionally.
I love it. Great stuff, Kylee. I can tell just from this conversation and your expertise, you are an incredible leader in your own right. So it's been an honor to be able to connect with you and learn from you and hear your story. So I want to thank you for that. I also want to let everybody know and remind you, if you're interested, you want to be the authority in your space, and you feel like you're not getting your message out well enough, launch your platform, join the wait list at robzwentz.com for the Pro Podcaster Academy. This has been another true testimony of breakthrough. Until next time, this has been the Unstuck Movement.